If Satan can't get your soul, he'll settle for your mind. And if he wins there, he doesn't need the rest. Entire cities, nations, and even generations have fallen because of ideas that first took root in a single human mind. And that's not drama, it's strategy. And it's exactly why Dr. Thomas Horn launched his entire ministerial career with two powerful books aimed at exposing and countering this nefarious plan: Spiritual Warfare, The Invisible Invasion, and The Gods Who Walk Among Us. For decades, these titles were out of print, but now we've brought them back. And the words of Dr. Thomas Horn don't just echo, they roar. Louder today than ever before. Urgent, unshakable, and unmistakably prophetic. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to SkyWatch Television. I'm Joe Artis Horn. Today we continue something of a memorial to the late Dr. Thomas Horn, my father, and we're talking about some of his most early writings. But before we dive into today's discussion, let me introduce who's here. She's a credentialed, ordained reverend with a degree in Bible and theology, a powerful voice in Christian television, Donna Howell.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
She's a legend and pioneer of podcast radio, Christian television personality, and best-selling author of the Red Wing Saga, Sharon Gilbert. His broadcasting career has spanned for more than 40 years. He's the best-selling author of the groundbreaking books Last Clash of the Titans, The Great Inception, and The Second Coming of Saturn, Derek Gilbert. She's the visionary and founder of Whispering Ponies Ranch, Nita Horn. She's the host of the popular Christian television program, The Simply His Coffee Shop, Catherine Horn. If you missed last week's program, go back to the archives wherever you watch SkyWatch Television. Maybe go to the App Store and download our SkyWatch TV mobile app, where they still have yet to try and cancel us. Ladies and gentlemen, we continue our discussion today about some of my father, Dr. Thomas Horn's earliest writings. And I'm going to bring this up on the screen for you so that you can see this. Thomas Horn, The Early Years. It's a two-book in one collection. First, The Gods Who Walk Among Us. Second, Spiritual Warfare, The Invisible Invasion. You know, last week we talked about some of what's in these books. We talked about some of the spiritual warfare that our father contextually began to experience in the late 70s, early 80s, and in the 90s. And he wrote a lot about that, Sharon. We talked just a little snippet. I mean, you can't take two of his early works and do it all in 28 minutes last week, which is why we're here again today to continue this discussion. And we're still not going to squeeze it all in, but Tom didn't just mention demonic city strongholds once or twice. Throughout his early workings, he broke it down 4 different times using only biblical examples to show how these invisible powers operate across entire cities or regions. One of those examples was Persia from Daniel 10, where Gabriel's arrival was delayed 21 days because of a powerful dark entity rolling over that territory. Can you tell us about how that was a clear example of a demonic stronghold and how this same kind of influence still works in cities today?
Yeah, it's Daniel 10, verse 13, where Daniel is told by the angel who comes to visit him that the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. Now, if this was a human prince, there is no way he's withstanding the angel for 21 minutes, much less 21 days. But more than that, he said, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I was left there with the kings of Persia. Now, to the best of our knowledge of history, there was only one king of Persia at that time, not multiple kings. So these appear to be additional supernatural entities, minions of the prince of Persia, who were basically tying up this very powerful angelic being, loyal to God, for 3 weeks. The fact that he was referred to as the Prince of Persia suggests that he had some territorial authority.
Right.
And we go back to Deuteronomy 32, verse 8, where Moses, in recounting the history of the Israelites to Israel, said, when God gave the nations their inheritance, he's talking about after Babel, when he divided the nations, he numbered them according to the number of the sons of God. And this was the understanding, as Donna alluded to last week, Jews of the Second Temple period, which includes the time of Jesus and the apostles, the early church until the time of Augustine, that God delegated to angelic beings, responsibility for overseeing humanity when he divided the nations after Babel, basically saying, look, you don't want to deal with me. This is why you're building this artificial mountain to make contact with other spirits. Fine, I'll give it to you, but you're not going to like it. And then, of course, he reserves one nation for himself, which was the nation that Michael was placed in charge of. You can just imagine in the unseen realm, the divine council, Michael, I've got a special assignment for you.
Right.
Just wait. So this is what was going on in Persia. An angelic messenger sent to Daniel, intercepted by a rebellious fallen angel, ties him up for 3 weeks. Michael, go help Gabriel. Frees up Gabriel. Gabriel goes, delivers the message to Daniel. And then in verse 20, he says, I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. Now, bear in mind, that's 250 years in the future, because Daniel was taken to Babylon around 597 BC. Alexander and the Greeks didn't come to Persia until the late 4th century BC.
So how long was that battle?
How long was that battle going on? You've got another reference here to another angelic being with geographic responsibility. And of course, you see later in the prophecies of the four beasts, you got the beast representing the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greeks and the Romans and so on. So this is something that's clearly biblical. And does it still happen today? Well, we've talked to Lieutenant Colonel Robert McGinnis about this. Defender Publishing has published a number of his books.
Yeah.
For example, The Deeper State.
That's right.
Which dealt with that issue. And as Colonel McGinnis will tell you, he has seen it from the inside, the evil at work in our nation's capital. This is probably true of capitals all over the world, because as Satan was tempting Jesus, he said, look, bow the knee to me and I'll give you all these kingdoms. So I think we're dealing with Satan and then minions working for him. There is a hierarchy in the fallen realm, and the earth is temporarily under their control.
And in your dad's later books, he makes it clear that our country, as well as many other countries, he looks at the architecture.
Yes.
What are we worshiping?
Right.
What princes are in charge of the United States?
Apollyon Rising 2012, Zenith 2016, Zeitgeist 2025. Yeah, those are themes in his works.
And Mom, you probably remember this because he writes about it, I believe, in Spiritual Warfare, The Invisible Invasion. But one of the origin events that brought a reality check to my father, and one of the reasons he wrote so much about these regions, these areas of demonic control, was he was a very young pastor. You and he had taken a very small pastorship in a town that he had no idea what he had walked into. The spiritual oppression, the demonic activity, the possession. People were playing with all kinds of portals and trying to speak to the dead and look for enlightenment through their windows and speaking into the mirror and lighting candles. But he writes about this in his early writings. And one of the things that eventually happened when he was finally approached by some of the board members of his church, kind of set him down one day. They came together and they said, Tom, we need you to understand what you've walked into. We've discovered, and they found these scrolls rolled up in some of the official government buildings, local mayorships and stuff. They spread them out, and it appears that several druidic ceremonies had been done on purpose for the specific and the express purpose of devoting certain areas to be portals, wherein their father, Satan himself, could allow his minions to come in and influence the lives of those living in this community. Literally dedicated these areas as rites of passage to the demonic world. And that was when he thought, oh my goodness, I am in so far beyond in over my head. And he writes what he did in that community to stand and to help several of the young women that were being oppressed. Some of the stories, one young mother calling him at like 1 a.m, there is something beating on the side of her wall, and as she runs to the front door to see what it is, this giant shadow is being casted on the windows as she runs around to the front door, and now it's beating on the front door. And I remember my father telling this story over and over and over again. The story never changed. At some point, jovially, to bring some light to the heaviness of this conversation, he would say this giant Chewbacca thing that she's describing on the other end of a rotary dial-up phone is beating on whatever part of the wall that her and her daughter would run to. And all he could do as a young pastor was just pray over her the name of Jesus over and over and over again. And eventually, the beating on the walls began to stop. And then he starts, once the hysteria calms down, he starts to ask, what in the world was going on prior? Well, they had been playing with a Ouija board. In desperate admiration for, I believe it was her grandmother, it's all in the book, they were trying to communicate with the dead. They missed her. They were destroyed without her. And I don't remember how they got the pastor's number. I believe it was on a local community flyer. My dad was an open book. He had it posted on the church. He would
had a
talk to anybody.
newsletter he
Yeah,
sent
people
out.
had his number. Police officers had his number. But in any case, he writes about these origin stories. And Sharon, one of the case studies in spiritual warfare is the region of Gadara, where Jesus confronted a demonic stronghold so intense it identified itself as legion. And that wasn't just about one man, it was a regional infestation, very much, I think, like the one we're talking about now. What other examples do we see in the Gospels where Jesus directly challenged spiritual strongholds tied to specific locations, cities, or even territories?
Oh my goodness. Well, let me just unpack the Legion story in the first place, because that is a name that would have been recognized by all of his disciples and anyone there, that referred to about 6,000 Roman soldiers that all called itself that because they were all either inside this gentleman or in the region. This took place in the region of Bashan, place of the serpent. This was the valley of the shadow of death, Derek and I believe. So the Lord, who tells us in Psalm 23, he will lead his sheep, us, who are covered by his blood. He leads us into the stronghold, into the valley of the shadow of death, so that the fallen realm can see what he does for those he loves. And in the case of Legion, he cast him out of the guy, and they went into a bunch of pigs, because they said, knowing the time, it's not time for us to go to our final destruction. The Lord used these demonstrations to show us that we also have authority over those who would combat against us. Derek and I, when we started podcasting, we told people right up front, welcome to the battlefield, because we are all born on a battlefield.
Yeah.
Those strongholds are all over the world.
Yes.
Just as you were saying. And Jesus, in his ministry, demonstrated that he would go up against these entities that knew who he was, which is really interesting when you think about it, because he declared himself on the top of Mount Hermon, transfigured right up there, said, come get me, and yet they still crucified him.
Right.
Yeah.
Not knowing that was the very thing he wanted them to do, because he needed to die for us. But yeah, these strongholds are worldwide because, as Derek said, after Babel, the Lord released and assigned watcher class angels to go over each language group and to take control of them to help them. But they all took worship except for Michael. He's the only one that was faithful. And I got to tell you, I can't wait till that day when Michael stands up, because we're told in the Bible the day is coming when Michael stands up. He's sitting and watching all of this taking place right now. He's in the battle when called, but for the most part, he is being reserved for a time that is yet to come, because that battle is real. And if you're watching this and you're thinking, that doesn't apply to me, Tom Horn saw it a long time ago. The Lord trained him for the things that he was going to be called to do and to teach us to do.
Yeah. You know, Donna, one major topic in spiritual warfare that our father, Dr. Thomas Horn, felt urgently compelled to address was the battlefield of the mind. I remember, man, as a teenager, this was something he talked about often. But you and I both know that growing up with him, he never believed that Satan could read your thoughts or climb inside of your head involuntarily and begin to pull various control levers.
Right.
So for those who might wonder how the enemy can influence the mind without direct access to the mind, how would our father have explained that?
Well, once again, he was well ahead of his time, because what he described back in the 90s has now been proven time and time again through neuroscience. We're discovering that neuroplasticity literally and physiologically changes your brain. So a neural pathway, this part of your brain and this part of your brain, you think a thought and it shoots a little line that fired, and now there's a pathway there that wasn't necessarily there before. You think it again and again, and it widens the pathway, kind of like the way that you would ride your bike in the woods or something. At first there's brush and you have to stop and whack the weeds out of the way or whatever, but after you've been riding that for a while, you have changed the woods, and now there's a pathway where your bike can travel. Well, that's how the brain works. He knew this, and he explained how this works, explaining, of course, to the reader of Spiritual Warfare, the Invisible Invasion, that the mind is where decisions are made. So Satan knows that if he wins there, he wins everywhere else. That's essentially the point that his book was trying to make. Now, Tom, on the other hand, Dad, used 2 Corinthians 10, 3-5, expounding on taking every thought captive and surrendering the entire mind fully and completely over to the Lord. And in so doing, our biggest vulnerability to the enemy is already indomitable. So that's where he started a lot of his spiritual warfare. He talked about the strongholds, okay? I referred to them a minute ago as neural pathways, but strongholds is how he put that. When you think about what habitual sin is, very regular. We shouldn't have to explain this to people, and yet people act as if they don't know. But when you make a neural pathway stronger and stronger and stronger, it turns into an addiction. Whether that an addiction is a substance or pornography, whatever it is, the neural pathway turns into an addiction. And what we are actually doing when we say, I'm going to fall into this again. I'm going to choose to do this again. What you're actually saying, you're going, bad thing or good thing? I'm going to go with the bad thing. What you're really doing is Satan, God, going to go to the Satan thing. And he brings that to life in a way that it makes you irrefutably convicted, where you walk away and you go, whoa, okay, I see. It's just like the Bible says that you cannot have two masters. You either serve the Lord or you serve something else, but you are certainly not going to get by with the gray area where you sin a little bit here and there, and then you sin a lot a bit, and you continue to sin. But it's just at the end of the day, it's all a wash, and God will understand. See, the thing that we've lost is balance. We've lost the understanding of balance in the church because the prosperity gospel had a lot to do with this. For so many years, we have emphasized the love of Christ to the exclusion of recognizing sin. And here's what happens when you do that. Love. God is love. He is all love. Hear me at home. Yes, God is love, but part of love is understanding and recognizing the sin that condemns. And Tom was very convicting because he reminded us throughout his book in Spiritual Warfare, the Invisible Invasion, and the Battlefield of the Mind, he reminded us God uses the mind to birth vision and movement. Satan uses it to seduce.
Yeah.
Correct.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we want to remind you that SkyWatch TV is a viewer-supported ministry, and right now when you order the new book, Thomas Horn, The Early Years, which features both complete original works, The Gods Who Walk Among Us, and Spiritual Warfare, The Invisible Invasion from the SkyWatchTVstore.com, we're going to send it to you as our gift for your donation of only $25 or more, which includes free shipping to all U.S. addresses. But right now, and just in time for the holidays, you have an opportunity to upgrade your gift to include the entire Dr. Thomas Horn Definitive SkyWatch TV collection that features the complete anthology of all of his greatest television series on 8 DVDs. That's 96 episodes, including the very first pilot of SkyWatch TV ever, and has a running time of 45 hours. But this special upgrade also includes Dr. Thomas Horn's Rome and the Star God DVD that reveals the Faustian deal with the devil that has been made between the Vatican and our, quote, alien brothers as the world awaits the arrival of who they refer to as the Star God. Also included in this special upgrade are both volumes of the SkyWatch TV Classics audio series on MP3 audio CD. This incredible, nearly 30-hour collection features 6 of Dr. Thomas Horn's all-time, most listened to audio series ever, including Something Transhuman This Way Comes, The Coming Replacement Humans, As It Was in the Days of Noah, Conspiracy Theory Special Edition, The Coming Zombie Apocalypse, and Psychotronic Warfare. All of these amazing original works sold separately hold a retail value of nearly $300. Yours now for your donation of only $69.99 or more, which again includes free shipping to all U.S. addresses. Once again, your support helps SkyWatch TV continue reaching the world with the gospel of Jesus Christ. You can scan the QR code on your screen using the camera app on your phone for instant access to this special opportunity. You can also visit us at SkyWatchTVstore.com or call 1-844-750-4985 and ask for the book, Thomas Horn, The Early Years, and or Thomas Horn, The Early Years with Special Upgrade Legacy Collection right now. It is not an opportunity that you're going to want to miss out on. Derek, with just a few minutes left on the clock, The Gods Who Walk Among Us, which is a part of this collection, is essentially a theological expose on how ancient gods never truly disappeared, but rebranded themselves throughout time from mythology to New Age aliens to spiritual entities demanding worship today. You know, my father was one of the only scholars in the 80s and 90s who dared to even suggest that the little gods, the little g gods of the Bible were real entities, not just mythological characters with matching statues. After all, the Bible doesn't say, don't imagine other gods. It says, you shall have no other gods before me.
Right.
It calls them gods. So imaginary boogeymen always felt kind of silly and dismissive to my father.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Your framing of the question is absolutely correct. I mean, when God told Moses, when they were still in Egypt, look, on the night of the Passover, I will execute judgment on all the gods of Egypt. He didn't say, okay, the Egyptians will be shown that their gods are just their imaginary friends. Why would God bother telling Moses this if, in fact, the gods of Egypt were as real as SpongeBob SquarePants?
Right.
I mean, how does that magnify God and demonstrate his power and authority? When Joshua told the Israelites on Mount Ebal, choose this day who you will serve, the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell, but as for me and my house, we
Right.
will serve Yahweh.
Right.
Things have not changed since the Bible was written, since Moses wrote that in the 15th century BC, or when Jesus went to the base of Mount Hermon and said, this mountain back here, on this rock, this Canaanite Mount Olympus, this is where I'm going to build my congregation, my ecclesia. And the gates of hell, this really big cave right over here, which in the first century, everyone back then knew that that was the literal entrance to the netherworld. Jesus didn't say, this isn't how any of this works.
Right.
Forget all of this, that's all fake news.
Right.
He said, no, the gates of hell right over here will not prevail against my congregation. Again, I don't see any evidence that things have changed in the last 2,000 years. So yes,
Right.
the gods of the pagans are real.
The Lord himself calls them gods.
God calls them God. Look, if you got a problem with that, take it up with the author of the book.
On the other hand, and as Tom made very clear throughout his books, there is only one God.
Capital G,
Amen.
God.
Capital
There
G.
is
Correct.
only one God, and the rest are all pathetic imitations.
They're all created beings.
Fallen angels, if you
Fallen
want, for lack of a
angels.
better term. So, yes, they are real, but no, this is not a polytheistic worldview. There is one uncreated being who spoke all things into existence.
That's
the
right.
rest of these gods, small g gods, who God, capital G, refers to as gods, they're imposters.
Do you think, Derek, that there's any evidence that today, as we're sitting here in 2025 in the studio recording programs, that there's evidence that the pagan gods of the ancient world never went away? And if so, which of the gods from the ancient world do you think are maybe more prevalent in the world today?
I think we just need to look at the news, especially over the last 10 or 15 years. And I think Sharon can elucidate on this because you've done a presentation on the god or goddess, the original transgender entity on planet Earth. Jesus identified Satan, Matthew 12, beginning at verse 22, as Baal, the storm god. So Zeus, Jupiter, that's Satan. The king of the pantheon and all of these ancient pantheons, even the ancient Hindu pantheon and Indra, the storm god, king of the pantheon. Same story, different names, but there is a female goddess who could switch gender at will, who seems to be exercising a lot of influence over our culture.
She is called in Sumeria Inanna, and she's got a lot of other names, Ishtar. She had the reputation as being one who, if you're born a boy and you want to be a girl, fine. You're born a girl, you want to be a boy, fine, I can do that for you. Just come and worship in my temple. In fact, her priests had to self-remove certain apparatus upon their bodies so that they could no longer look male. They had to serve her in a female-ish kind of way. In their proper estate, when they were with the Lord in heaven, they did not have male or female attributes. But when they come here, for whatever reason, spirit beings, material beings, they can shift left to right. They can go male or female. And some are worshipped as females, some are worshipped as males. But I believe Inanna is the whore of Babylon. And she's got other of these entities that are working with her to bring about the New World Order that we're always going toward. And your dad, he foresaw that. He wrote about it. He tried to warn the world about it. And sometimes he got pushback for it, and that's spiritual warfare.
And I will say that it did not come without sacrifice because he was dedicated to the call, to the message that God had given him. I've never seen anybody work as much as that man.
Right.
Every time he would speak, he would give more time and energy into the study of what he would share. He was not flippant at all about what he did. His life was all about this that God has called him to do, and I can attest to that.
Amen.
As we wrap things up on remembering Tom and spiritual warfare, the invisible invasion, and the gods who walk among us, my favorite part is the victor's master weapons. It's a chapter in one of those books. And I got to tell you, the reason it's my favorite is because the way he talks about it, first of all, it's all biblical truth. Yes, it's there in the Bible. But sometimes the truth can be right in front of you in the Bible, and depending on how you read it and how you feel about it, it becomes Rhema or it doesn't. Rhema, the living word, right?
Right.
Some people read the Bible and present biblical truth the way Ben Stein sells eye drops. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It gets the red out. And then there's these people like
Analogy.
Tom. They read the Bible and they go, oh, did you see what that said? And they bring it
Just
to
explode.
life. Okay. So when he gets into the 4 weapons of warfare, listen, that is not your average prayer. Okay, militant prayer is fierce. It is spirit-driven. It is a warfare level kind of intercession. It's targeted, Tom says, meaning it is aimed at demolishing strongholds and exposing spiritual darkness. It is relentless, meaning it digs its teeth in and it does not give up until there's a breakthrough. It's spirit-led, meaning it is not just a bunch of emotional pleading. It is prayer that purposefully and powerfully aligns itself with the will of God and carries divine authority. The way he talks about the weapons, it's the anti-Ben Stein in the room. If a lot of other weapons of warfare teachings are, that's right, yeah, the Bible does say that. Tom's is like, yeah, let's go. He's got this energy behind him, and it bleeds up off the page. Tom's teaching is a blueprint, a field manual for how you can reclaim your city, your town.
Yes.
That's right. In fact, there were many churches that took the spiritual warfare book as a handbook for their communities.
No, that's right, Mom. We remember it well. Unfortunately, we're all out of time. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us over the last couple of weeks while we revisit some of the earliest writings of my father, Dr. Thomas Horn. For everyone here in studio, everybody up here on panel, thank you for joining me once again. I'm Joe Artis Horn. Keep your eyes on the prize, which is Jesus Christ. We'll be back.